Thou seekest for the hearths and fires as first of chills doth bite. Prepare thy fields, sow garlic, plant the olive trees in light. Plant chestnut trees and seed of wheat, thy sheep shall multiply. Collect the nuts, the woodman fells the hardening timbers spry. The month of November begins with All Saints' Day, generally known in England by its Old English name of All Hallows, and the eve as All Hallows Even, or Halloween. This is an extremely important feast in our rite, and merits a particular kind of processional anthem, reserved for the greatest feasts of the year. Those who keep this feast properly are supposed to down work at midday when a bell from the church is rung, inviting the faithful to come to the church for a special time reserved for the lighting of a great many tapers and candles. This is a relic of an earlier practice where the faithful were required to provide a sort of tithe or tax in candles known as the light scot, which was due on this day. As dusk falls, it is traditional for all of the bells of the church to be rung for as long as possible, and in medieval times this meant all night, as a comfort to past souls that they were being remembered and prayed for on All Souls' Day. Far from being a time of sombre, morbid observance, this feast is characterised by games, and particularly apple bobbing, which happens after evensong, normally accompanied by a big bonfire, roasting nuts, and the eating of a particular type of small cake called soul cake. There are many practices associated with this time of year which the clergy have not always been entirely comfortable with, so I'm going to dutifully give you a rundown of things please not to do next time All Souls comes around. Number 1. There seems to be a belief, at least stretching back to the medieval period, that the tradition of roasting nuts on All Souls' Day allows potential love matches to discover if they will make it as a married couple. The idea is that you both roast the nut in the fire, and if they fall together and burn with a single flame, then that's good, and you can go ahead and get married. If they're shot out of the fire, this forebodes a bad match. Please do not make important life decisions on omens discerned in combusting chestnuts. Number 2. Please do not walk around the church 3 times holding a dagger and then look through the keyhole and expect to see your true love. I have yet to hear of an episode of this actually working, and the sight is alarming to those who aren't in the know. Number 3. This one is particularly aimed at certain matrons I have known in my time. Please do not attempt to curse your enemies by adding them to the list of the deceased to be remembered at Mass. It's confusing for the priest, and I suspect will only amount to someone who has the same name and is actually deceased being prayed for. Number 4. Please do not attempt to post your dead relatives' alcohol and cigarettes through the holes in the side of the crypt, or by leaving them hidden in the churchyard. This is a practice specifically prohibited by the church and puts the priest in an awkward position of having to go around and pick up and dispose of the carefully placed packages. Those little holes in the side of the crypt are for ventilation, not as a convenient otherworldly postal system. Your relatives have no need of wine and cigarettes in the age hereafter. There is more than enough to go around in heaven. Number 5. Soul cakes are for you and not your garden. They are not blessed, and while they may, who knows, provide some nutrition to the soil, they will not cause your vegetables to miraculously win next year's competition at the village fete. This custom, so far as I can make out, comes from a time when it was seen fit to reward the spirits which inhabit the fields with offerings. Demons are very much like zoo animals. Please do not attempt to feed them. If you want your field blessed, please let the priest know, and we will do it according to a proper non-demon nourishing method, which will be much more likely to render benefits. Finally, please do not use the candles in the church to try and discern whether your relatives are in heaven or hell. While there is some history of semi-divination-like practices, including candles at Mass in our chronicles, it is being used to discern the wills of saints, for example. It will give you no information as to the location of your loved ones. If you are concerned, please spend the time praying and not attempting magic. On the 15th is the feast of St. Machius, who is a very, very special saint in the calendar of our diocese, namely because he is the cathedral's most prominent relic, as you can see from this photo. Mallow is most famous for his exciting voyages of exploration, and was the favourite accomplice of the famous St. Brendan the Navigator. Machius left his abbey at Cloncarfen, and after some lengthy wanderings discovered a mysterious place called the Island of the Blessed, which is probably North America, or what the Vikings called Finland. Alternatively, there is a legend that the Island of the Blessed is in fact the Falkland Islands, which is why the Spanish called them the Islas Malvinas, Mallow's Islands. He evidently made it back to tell his fellow monks all about his exploits, because he later went on a second voyage with Brendan, where they ended up encountering a dead giant who they miraculously revived before baptizing him and returning him to his grave. Later on in his life, he moved to Brittany in order to evangelize the local pagan inhabitants, with somewhat mixed results. Evidently, however, he was fairly successful, particularly in a town then known as Aleph, now called St. Malo on the French coast. He was elevated to the episcopate and died in the year 621, his relics being preserved in the Abbey of Saintes. At the time of the Revolution, or perhaps a little bit before, the relics were translated into a private collection in the UK, from which they came into the possession of our current bishop, who donated them to the church. Needless to say, the relics are very important to us, and Mallow is a saint dear to our hearts. On the 20th, we have Saint Edmund, king and martyr. Edmund, not to be confused with Edward or the other Saint Edmund, was an Anglo-Saxon king of East Anglia in the 9th century. Edmund succeeded to the throne at the age of 14, though we don't know a lot about his life because the heathen Vikings unfortunately burned all the records of his reign. In 869, the great heathen army advanced up through East Anglia, and it is at this point that most of the records of his life, although more properly really the records of his death, pick up. There are two differing traditions. The first is that he met his death in a straightforward battle with the Danes. The second, more interesting story is that he met his death at a place called Hegelisdun, after the head of the Viking army, called Ivar the Boneless, demanded that he renounce Christ. Edmund refused, and the Danes beat him, shot him with arrows and beheaded him. His head was later thrown into a forest, but was found by the faithful after they heard a wolf calling in Latin, "Hic, hic, hic," meaning "here, here, here." Edmund was a very important saint to our ancestors and wound up being the improbable patron of some of the most successful medieval kings, most notably Edward III and his son Richard, who is seen here in one of the most famous photographs from the medieval period, being presented to the Virgin and Child by St. John the Baptist, St. Edward and St. Edmund. His relics were kept in a shrine in the town of Bury St. Edmunds, from which it gets its name. Many people may be familiar with the flag of St. Edmund, which was traditionally seen as the flag of the entire Anglo-Saxon people and the battle flag of the English army, so far as such a thing can be said to have existed. The more eagle-eyed will note that this looks a lot like the flag of Wales, and you're not wrong. The difference is in the colour inversion. The Welsh dragon is red on a white background. This is a reference to a peculiar old story which I'm going to lift here from the National Trust's account. Way back in the 5th century, the Celtic king Vortigern chose Dionysus Emrys as the site for his castle. From here he hoped to escape the Saxons, but his plans for a fortress weren't easily achieved. Every night the royal masons would lay down their tools, only to return the next day to find that they'd vanished, and their carefully crafted walls had fallen down. And so it went on, day after day, until Vortigern was forced to seek the help of sorcerers and magicians. They advised that the ground should be sprinkled with the blood of a child born to a human mother and a father from the other world. A search was launched, and eventually the child was found in Caer Midrin, Carmarthen, and preparations for the sacrifice were made. But the child, Myrddin Emrys, was no ordinary child. In fact, he was Merlin. Merlin convinced Vortigern that two dragons lay sleeping under a lake inside the mountain, and it was they that were destroying the foundations of his fortress. Convinced for some reason that the boy was right, Vortigern commanded his labourers to dig deep into the mountain. They did as he was told and discovered an underground lake just as Merlin had predicted. Once drained, the red and white dragons that lay sleeping there woke up and began to fight. Of course, the white dragon represents the Saxons and the red dragon represents the Welsh. Eventually, of course, the red dragon won and the white dragon sloped back to England, at least for the time being. Vortigern's castle was finally built and duly named Dinas Emeris in honour of Merlin Emeris, and the red dragon had been celebrated ever since. Not convinced by the story? Well, in 1945 the site was excavated by archaeologists who discovered a lake and the ruins of the fortress dating to Vortigern's time, and the walls showed signs of having had to be rebuilt several times. And that brings November to a close. Next month, Advent takes off, and we look forward to electing the Bairn Bishop and to all of the weird and wonderful traditions surrounding Christmas. Until then, beloved listener, may all the saints in heaven guide us through the darkness of this world unto that light of light which is Christ. May Saint Machius, the wayfaring evangelist, and Saint Edmund the King and Martyr smile kindly upon their homeland, and shine forth their radiant blessing upon us and their holy relics, and form us into that living body, through which and in which we may gain a place beside them, before the heavenly King of all. Amen. Thanks for watching. If you like what we're doing, or if you want to help support our mission, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope to see you again soon. Benedicat vos, omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus. Amen.